Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the media show. I'm your host, Nick Palavita, and today we're going to be discussing a very important topic. Thank you. We're going to talk about Africa, which international broadcast media does broadcast into Africa. Not only that, we have some shows that originate from Africa. But first of all, let's bring in some of our panelists. This person is actually a Mega Society member and also a former writer of Jimmy Kimmel Live. Let's bring in the Honorable Rick Rosner. Rick, welcome to the show. We're going to discuss the Dark Continent today with a very special guest. And this lady originates from the United Kingdom, who fell on her bike on the way over to the studio. Let's bring in Lindsay Oliver. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Hello there.
Okay, since you're the newbie on the show, can you tell us a little about who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Okay. Well, very briefly, I began as a lawyer, I think, as you did, Nick, and got tangled up in TV and media and was placed onto their commercial side. So that was with CNBC. I was actually their general counsel in Europe. Then I flipped over, went to the Middle East and was the founding director, one of the founding directors of Al Jazeera in English language.
Right.
Then I came back to the UK and was commercial director for Bloomberg for Europe, Middle East and Africa. And then I took a job down in Africa. One of the deals I'd done was to set up Bloomberg TV Africa. And then I was offered a job down there for a year and went to live in Lagos for a year. So that was an experience. And since then, since I came back, I've been working on a number of projects, but one of which is to have a television channel which is specifically targeted at Africans who are out of home, so to speak. So out of their country in Africa or further afield in Europe or the US, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Africa is a pretty big market space. When we were looking at it, they have about 1 billion people in the continent. And we were broadcasting shows from Lagos, Nigeria, which Mark can tell you a little bit more about, and also in South Africa. We had several of them coming out of Johannesburg, South Africa. But one of the problems that we faced was bandwidth. In other words, to accept and receive our brother Mark needed to increase his bandwidth. Is there a bandwidth problem that you see, Lindsay, in terms of broadcasting, receiving, and distributing content in the African continent?
There is less of a problem now with point-to-point delivery of content. So I know a lot of people who've got new products. If I want to get content down to Africa, that's not a problem anymore. But the people being able to see your content, of course, is much of a much bigger deal. There's never really been any cable in Africa, and satellite failed miserably. Most of my experience is in Nigeria. Of course, you've got multi-choice DSTV down in South Africa, and they've moved up to Nigeria. So there is satellite in Africa, but compared to the number of people that live there, really it hasn't been a huge success, and it tends to be something available very much to the elite there. So what people have done, especially the younger generation, they've jumped straight onto phones and are consuming, as it's happening all over the world, young people are consuming video content on their phones, but perhaps even more so in Africa because they a lot of the time don't have a lot of choice. And then the issue is, of course, if they have a deal for their mobile phone, they have a certain amount of data for the month. And the last thing they want to do is use up their entire data for the month watching a film. So that's the challenge. The challenge is to be able to reach an end user who can afford to watch your content, not because, afford, not in the sense of being able to join up for a platform, a broadcast platform, but because of the cost of the data that it's using, the bandwidth that it's using when they actually receive it. So just to finish off, the trick is, from what I understand, and I'm sort of looking into this a lot more, the trick is to partner with one of the mobile companies, somebody like MTN or Airtel or Glo, so that they can ring fence your content. And that's what I'm working on anyway, so that they'll say, if you watch this channel, it doesn't actually count towards what your data allowance for the month. But I'm sure I'm not the only person who's had that idea. So I suspect there's going to be a lot of competition to try to do something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have one person who goes routinely to Kenya, Barbara Smith, who Mark knows.
Right, and actually she's in Africa right now. She's actually, I believe,
she's in Africa right now. Well, let me tell you also what they recently discovered in Kenya. You'll love this: gold deposits, $12 trillion worth of gold deposits. So, Lindsay, I think affordability in Kenya is not going to be an issue on a going forward basis.
Well, they have Zuku in Kenya as well, don't they? In East Africa, they were the first ones to sort of really get into IPTV, and they never went the satellite route really in East Africa. So I mean, and that's wonderful. My goodness, I mean, East Africa is booming anyway. That's going to make a tremendous difference, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Lindsay, one of the things I've been seeing and observing, and I just love to see your thoughts about this, is how a lot of people, particularly in the nations of Africa, are going to, like you just mentioned it earlier, the audio kind of apps, as well as I'm seeing a lot that are going into the metaverse space, because I'm actually not been as active lately, but there was a period for several months I was very active in Clubhouse and saw both the Africans that were in the various African nations, as well as those that had moved to other countries like London, that were very active in that space. And I was also seeing a lot of people, particularly like you said, among those that are in that 20 to 40 set, that were very active in the metaverse and in some of these newer spaces as well. But I just wanted to know if that was something that you were observing also, and some of your thoughts around that observation of mine.
I've got to be honest, I don't know an awful lot about that. It's something I need to learn. I need to learn more about this kind of thing. But yes, I mean, the impression I'm getting is very much so. I mean, my experience is primarily in Nigeria, although as I say, I've done deals and had plenty of activity in other places, but in Africa. But Nigeria is the only country that I've actually lived in. And if I can say this, please take this in the spirit that it's intended, because it's meant to be flattering. I've never known a country, a group of people who hustle so much, and they have to. You know, people used to say to me, in a certain disparaging way about Nigerians, oh well, they're always, they've always got a hustle, they've always got a side gig going on. And I used to say, look, if you were in a country of 200 million people, where there's probably about 5 million legitimate jobs, what do you think you'd be doing to feed your family? And I think they have, and the reason I'm saying that is because particularly the young people, they catch on so quickly. If there's an angle on something, if there's a way of cutting costs, of doing stuff, getting where they need to be, go to the Nigerians, because they'll have found out about it. So I'm behind the curve on that. But yes, I've no doubt that they're well ahead of it.
And the other thing I've noticed is they have a very active, and Rick may want to say something about this as well, as he was in that industry for a while. But usually when we think of the film industry, there are 3 of them that really get a lot of play. Of course, we know Hollywood is the number one that gets the most play, but then the other 2 that get a lot of play are Bollywood out of India and Nollywood out of Nigeria, because they do seem to have a very active film community as well. Some of it is kind of campy films, but they're still very much enjoyable as well.
Yes, and actually the quality has gone up remarkably. When I started doing Yanga TV, I was the TV channel we have. It's all about quality. It's all about surprising people who think that because it's African, the quality will be lower. And so we worked very hard to the word Yanga kind of means showing off in Pidgin English, and we worked very hard to have content that would surprise and show off the cultures that we were kind of targeting and drawing on. So yes, the quality. I mean, there are some tremendous. They don't even like, a lot of them don't like to be called Nollywood anymore, because they see that as a sort of slightly, that was the past. But there's some wonderful content coming out and doing incredibly well. Danny Glover, I don't know. Do you know Danny Glover?
I've heard of him, but he hasn't been on our network yet.
Okay, well, very famous actor, and he was in a film called 93 Days, or about the Ebola crisis, which seems a long way away now because we've all been so caught up with COVID. But yeah, I mean, I bought a lot of films to put on my network, and I deliberately bought the ones that were getting traction. around the world, and that's only going to increase. I know somebody who's comes from a very wealthy family in Africa, has set up a film studios in Lagos, and yeah, these guys are absolutely on the move, and they realise that they have a tremendous audience there to to serve. Another friend of mine, funnily enough, has built or is in the process of building a series of cinemas, because he told me a statistic. I can't remember what it was exactly, but he was explaining to me there's one cinema per 300 people or something in the UK, and it's like one per 3 million or something in Africa. It's something crazy, and he was saying that so underserved by cinema, and so he's sort of he's already built a load, but he's involved in expanding that. So I mean, there's tremendous opportunity there, as we all know.
Yeah, it sounds like tremendous opportunity. Other things that I noticed, and this was some time back, and I don't know how it is now. I know part of the reason that Nick was really glad to get this whole network going is to get more of the world to know other parts of the world, like to know stories from Africa, stories from Asia, and stories from a number of other places where we oftentimes will center on the United States and North American news and all of that. But I do remember that there was a time, and I don't know if it's still around because my dad was actually involved when it was formed, that there was actually a news service called African News Service that was based here in Durham, North Carolina, of all places. But it was very active in trying to make sure that there was news being covered from the African nation. And I think that actually morphed into something else later on that is still out there, but I'm not sure exactly what its name is and all along those lines. But how are you feeling that we as a world are doing in terms of covering the various nations in Africa? Because I do know a lot of times we sometimes want to put things, whether it's Africa or whether it's Latin America, into kind of like these large monoliths, not realizing that there are I think about 40 or 50 nations within Africa or something along those lines. And definitely we don't often have to think about that.
Yeah, I think it's my whole background is news. I mean, this is a bit of departure for me to be doing entertainment at the moment, but most of what I've done is news. And what attracted me to Al Jazeera when I was first asked to join them, and I started off. I mean, this was a long time ago. This is 2005. And I started off saying to them, no, I couldn't possibly work for a channel that shows beheadings. That's not me, And they gradually explained who they were and what they were. And I mean, the sad story there is that there was a channel that called itself Al Jazeera, and who that did do all these appalling things. And I said to them, well, you've got to shut them down. Oh, and they couldn't. They tried half-heartedly and couldn't. And so anyway, there are great misconceptions, I think, about that. And I'm tremendously proud to have worked for them now, because that was a wonderful time and a great time. And the thing that attracted me, one of the ways they persuaded me to come and work for them was that they were so keen on telling African stories. What they were trying to do, or certainly what they professed to try to do, was to tell the untold stories from the areas of the world that don't normally get the coverage, primarily from the US and the UK and those kind of news services. And I mean, it's a cliche now. It became a cliche, but we used to say at the time, if 1,000 people die in the States in any kind of accident or incident, I mean, it's massive news. But you can have floods, etc. in India. You kind of become immune to it, and it's not so much of a story. You don't get the human story behind so many of these tragedies and events, basically. So that was quite a long time ago that I started getting interested in learning more about areas where you don't necessarily get to hear that much, unless something, a famine, or this is with Africa particularly, if there's a famine or a war or something, you get to hear about it. But of course there's so much more, again, a cliche, but of course there's so much more to these 54 or so countries that make up this continent, and it's not all good, that's for sure, but it's not all bad either. And I think that's, this was, so when I got the chance at Bloomberg to set up a Bloomberg channel there, I was really interested. And then after that, when I was actually working with news organizations there, I mean, I know a lot of news organizations in Africa, north, south, east, and west, actually. Less in the north, I guess, actually, in fairness, but yeah, no, there are a lot of there are a lot of channels that have come and gone. Some are still there. You still have Channels TV, which is the news. That's the biggest news channel coming out of Nigeria. But you also have TVC News, and that's the one I was sort of acting CEO of for a little while, and others, and I think SABC has kind of, if they'll forgive me for saying so, I think SABC has kind of let down South Africa, because they were saying for years and years that they wanted to become a truly Pan-African news channel, and they didn't. They couldn't get out of their own way, I'm afraid. But so that was a shame. But yes, no, it's so many stories and so many new news channels popping up down there. So yeah, it's something that is very close to my heart, international news.
Yeah, Rick, what's your comment?
One of the biggest changes in the past 80 years has been universal access to information. Used to be, if you lived in a country that had low average income, you had, say before World War II, you had low access to the cultural stuff that the richer countries had. There's a thing called the Flynn effect, that in the 50 years after World War II, the average IQ of the entire world went up 15 points. And the guy, James Flynn, who discovered this, says it's not because people 100 years ago were idiots. It's because everybody now is on the same page, more or less, in terms of access to information. And it's like, we're snotty in America. We're going to pay less attention to Nigerian movies than Marvel movies. But there's access via cell phones, even if your income is low. And I would guess that everybody in Nigeria, on average, knows almost as much about the Marvel Comics universe as people in France, for instance.
Right. Yeah. And Lindsay, you're out of the United Kingdom, right? Is that
Yes,
where
London. That's right. Yes.
Or you're in London. Are you in the city of London, or are you one of the
No,
of
London's a great big blob. I'm just within the blob on the west side.
Okay, you're in the blob. Now, you work for Al Jazeera. We found something very interesting. Our content is reshown on Al Jazeera, which we went to CNN, they went like this. We went to BBC, they went like this twice. We went to Al Jazeera, I'm serious, and they redistributed our content. And why is it that Al Jazeera, because I go, well, isn't this, BBC, we don't want any other content but ours. Why was Al Jazeera open to redistributing content when these other two basically stuck their Western noses at us? Or do you see that happening in media?
I see that a lot. Al Jazeera, I mean, you've got to remember the people who started, the actual staff at Al Jazeera to begin with, were ex-BBC. I won't bore you with the story, but it was very idealistic, and certainly when I went in there as well, it was a wonderful time actually when we launched the English channel at Al Jazeera, because you had this big melting pot of people, journalists, as it should be, with very different views and perspectives, all in together, but what they cared about was the story. They cared passionately about telling stories and seeing stories, allowing people to see stories from different perspectives. That was what they wanted. So it didn't, I mean, we had Israeli, we had Jewish. I'm not sure if we had Israeli people at Al Jazeera, but certainly Jewish. It's very difficult to get in and out of Israel. I used to have 2 passports, for instance, to do that, so, but, there were all sorts of people working for Al Jazeera, and it was a wonderful time for that. And I think there is an open-mindedness about Al Jazeera. I think they got used to being the pariah, and so they think twice before they dismiss other people, because they know it happened to them sometimes when it was completely unjustified. And so I think in a funny way, it sounds a little bit, counterintuitive to say Al Jazeera is more open-minded, but in some ways they are, and look, I'm ex, I've never worked for CNN. My colleague has, and, that I'm working with at the moment, but, I've done the rounds of these big Western news organizations. And funnily enough, now, I won't go on about this because I don't want to hijack the call, but I'm actually involved in something at the moment, which is a brand new news service trying to address exactly this issue, the fact that people just think in the same way. They even worse now than ever before, because they're existing in these little echo chambers online. We're just fed things that the algorithms say, oh, look, she's interested in this, so we'll send her more of it. And she seems to like Fox News, so we'll send her a bit of Newsmax as well, and we end up thinking that our way of seeing things is what everybody else in the world sees as well. And we tend not to get fed information that counters that particularly. And I think that, this is an incredibly important thing and an incredibly dangerous thing. And I think that, to some extent, the mainstream news organizations, the Western ones, who will all tell you, oh, we're not like Russia Today, and we're not like this channel, CCTV out of China, and there's nothing more dangerous than thinking you have a neutral perspective or an unbiased perspective, and you can't have, nobody can have. The best thing you can do is try and recognize it and minimize it and see as much from other people's points of view as possible. But yes, I think what you're, going back to your original question about the why was Al Jazeera a bit more open-minded? I think because they've experienced it from their point of view, and we hired David Frost. Do you remember Sir David Frost? Sadly, no longer with us. And I think once they had a bit of confidence and people saw that they were hiring people of that caliber, they were able to, the channel was able to succeed, etc. But I don't think they forgot that they're always slightly on the outside, and I think it makes them a little bit more receptive to others who are doing things slightly differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rick.
The for-profit news, I don't know what Al Jazeera's business model is, but U.S. for-profit news channels, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, the for-profit aspect leads to terrible news habits and lopsided coverage. CNN, when those Malaysian planes went missing a few years ago, it was all missing planes all the time because that kept eyeballs on the channel. When U.S. broadcast news, when TV first started, when they started broadcasting at the end of the 40s, into the 50s, the news was a public service, was not supposed to make money. The US government says, we're giving you these broadcast wavelengths for free. You have to do a public service. And the public service was doing news broadcasts, which were at first 15 minutes a night and then half an hour at night. And nobody expected them to make money. They were just part of the deal. And then morning news shows, the Today Show, for instance, you started doing these 2-hour news shows that started making money, and people got the idea, oh, wait, we can do news and make money. And then you had Ted Turner come along with CNN, and now you've got this terrible lopsided coverage because it's all about holding eyeballs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also our experience, though, here in the United States, I don't know what the studies are in the United Kingdom. When I did a study on our broadcasting networks and our media in general, in the 1970s, there were 50 companies, 50 companies that had 90% of market share. That's in the 1970s. Today, 5 companies hold 90% of the market share. And so when you're listening to any of the broadcast, they all follow the same track. I think what Rick is pointing out, show me the money, and that's where their broadcasts go. Africa is not on their agenda. We do see a lot of stuff from United Kingdom. Okay. Matter of fact, PBS basically did everything but tell me we're not interested in any broadcast except to buy BBC Broadcasting and re-show it here. Seriously. And they said the reason why is Downton Abbey, and our average donor is a 69-year-old female, and we need programming that appeals to them. Your style program doesn't appeal to them. Have a good day. That's our PBS system. CBS, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. And if you can't knock NCIS off, you're off the table. So all the stuff in Africa, India, and around the world, China, we frankly don't care. And because of that, we don't, like if you said there's a lot of news going on in Africa, it's not part of Rick Steves' Europe. So the thing is, there's no Rick Steves' Africa. So we don't know jack what's going on in Africa. I don't know. Rick, have you ever even been to Africa? I haven't. You know?
No, unless I don't know, maybe on one of those package tours of Europe, we stepped onto Gibraltar and somehow maybe we're 1 foot into Africa at some point.
British.
Yeah, but why is it that the United States shunned Africa? I think on Today, Lindsay, if you watched any of our major broadcasts, here's what you're going to see in the news about Africa. So why is it that we shun Africa? What's the story here?
I mean, what Americans know about Nigeria, at least what they knew 5 years ago, was that's where you got the email scams from. Right. Americans mostly don't know that it's this huge nation, that it produces a lot of stuff. Netflix has put up some Nollywood movies, but they don't push them.
If I may, one massive problem is doing business in Africa. In Nigeria particularly, it's so hard. It's not like doing business if an American comes to the UK, you can do a deal or whatever, and the legal systems are fairly similar. Actually, the legal system is similar in Nigeria because unfortunately we went there and gave it to them. But it's so difficult to navigate yourself. I found very quickly that you need a local person who's totally trustworthy, who can help you navigate the system, because the system and the business culture is so different. And yeah, I think you're right. There are certain parts of the world that we Westerners care about. We care about the US, you care about us to some extent, and you're right. There are certain massive areas of the world that are completely off our radar. And I think it's one of the interesting things about whoever was, sorry, I've forgotten who was saying that, the access to information now is extraordinary. But also, of course, there's an extraordinary ability to indoctrinate and to disseminate propaganda because of that. So it's one of the funniest things, I don't want to keep going on about Al Jazeera, but I'll just mention this. One of the funniest things I noticed when I was there, because there was something people would say. If I went to the States, for instance, which I did several times to have meetings with people about Al Jazeera, and they were saying, oh no, how terrible, you're owned by somebody who's very rich and therefore the news is not impartial. And I said, the funny thing is, this guy is so bloody rich that he has nothing to do, the royal family, they've no interest, they don't care. And there is a freedom that I learned I had at Al Jazeera that I never had at Bloomberg or CNBC, because there was never this issue with money. And it's totally counterintuitive, isn't it? That you think you get more freedom if you're owned by one individual, which is all you shot. But if that one individual,
we're losing the audio. You hit something.
You might have hit your mic.
You might have hit your mic.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
We hear you now.
Oh, sorry. Whatever I was going on about. Sorry, but
you're going about on Al Jazeera that they're so rich they just don't care.
Yes,
and
the funny thing is that I became much more sensitive when I went back to Bloomberg, and I found that that I hadn't even noticed before. There were things that we would and wouldn't do. I mean, Michael Bloomberg, don't kill me, please. But this consideration of of money and viewers, eyeballs, as you say. It was quite liberating being at Al Jazeera because nobody cared. Now they cared about other things. I'm not saying they were the best at everything. Of course, they were much more restrictive when it came to issues of religion, for instance. But money, not so much. They weren't that bothered about ever ticking off some of their big advertising clients or anything like that. That was just never an issue.
Well, I was just shocked because what we redistribute through Al Jazeera, they take almost all of our content with no problems. And the other place that takes our content is the United Nations. And I'm going like, I can't believe that they take our content. So I rebroadcast through the United Nations and Al Jazeera because they are willing to take the content, and they have, very good distribution lines. In terms of Africa in general, other than the content that we have some broadcasters in Africa and Nigeria and then South Africa, we're not sure how to distribute into Africa because of the bandwidth issue. But
I can help you with that. If right. that's not a problem to get. I mean, there's a company, for instance, called SASI, which is a Pan-African IPTV platform. In its previous life, it was called Quasi. I don't know if you know of it. It depends how familiar you are with African distribution. But people like them. There's also a company called Avo. I mean, there's different places you can get. If I'm not, unfortunately, I wanted to come home an hour ago, read up on what you do, but as I say, fell off my bike and that wasn't possible. But
I'll email you, send you all the stuff. But
I can certainly help you get onto different platforms. Do you do linear content, or do you do individual programs that are there on a VOD basis?
We have. Oh, that's a good question. We're actually broadcasting this live on Roku, and so we have what they call. We just create. This has only been last couple months. We have what they call Pod TV Live, which is live broadcasting on Roku. Following your show will be Lamar Odom, whose claim to fame, I think, is he married. Besides playing for the LA Lakers, he married one of the Kardashians, I guess.
Oh yeah.
So he'll be following after this, and then Mark follows after that. So we have what they call Pod TV Live, which is live stream on Roku. We also do Pod TV video on demand. So this also be on a video on demand, so that people can see it on Roku video on demand. But we broadcast through LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn, Facebook groups, and all these what I call distribution points. So our broadcast goes like way out there to these various different distribution points. Right now, about 80 shows in 122 countries. But we're a very new network. We've been around for 2 years, and we're just growing very rapidly. That's all.
Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. Well, I can certainly help you with that if you'd like me to. There's plenty of places that you should be going, and both with linear channels and or with VOD content. Right. Yeah, I'll point you in the right direction if you'd like me to.
Yeah. Because the thing is, the African content, we started off with 2 shows or 3 from Johannesburg, and also one from Lagos, Nigeria. So they were actually. We have content that originates from various different countries, and shows like Swiss Impact originates from Zug, Switzerland, and we actually have Russia, China, Ukraine that originates from Kiev, Ukraine. It's right now our leading show because of the war in Russia.
Of course.
And then we have quite a few programs out of India, New Delhi. As you noticed the intro, a lot of our stuff comes from New Delhi, India. So we're really IBM TV. We start off as IBM TV. International Broadcast Media. Then we start off working with IBM. Then IBM goes, we don't want to use our name. And they literally took IBM TV away from us. So we switched to Pod TV. We actually owned IBM.TV for a while.
Wow. Pod TV's nice, though. It's a good name.
Well, it was like we have all these names in inventory, and we're going, what are we going to do? We can't be IBM TV anymore because IBM wants that for themselves. So we switched over to Pod TV, and we've been Pod TV probably for about a year out of the 2 years that we've been around. So it's been an evolutionary growth and development. But I did spend 2 years with PBS at their national conference, getting to know how they operate, and then realize you can't play games. You can't play with them. It's like they're owned by the state. I can get a whole list of reasons why PBS is a go nowhere. And then we spent about a year with CBS. And CBS, they like running game shows, Rick. Okay, but they're stupid game shows. They're not even good game shows. In other words,
That's why regular movies don't work.
a bunch of stuff and
Good
they're
morning, good afternoon.
Okay, so I have a
How you
theory
doing?
about
I'm
CBS.
doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I have a theory about CBS. I believe that there are about 10 million Americans with mild cognitive impairment who are still in charge of their own affairs. The kids haven't stepped in to take over yet because they're not that disabled. But it's a huge segment of the it's a huge vulnerable and capturable demographic. And CBS is entertainment for old people. It's shows that look like shows on other networks, but made a little bit clearer so old people can keep up. And all the murder shows, the detective shows on CBS make people who are kind of losing their shit a little bit feel like they're still on top of things. Similarly, Fox News, the same deal. It's dumbed down a little bit for people who have lost it a little bit. It captures your grandparents.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I just looked at it and I'm going, I hate to say, Lindsay, it's stupid programming. I don't know why anybody would watch our major networks. They're just stupid. But
because stupid people need entertainment because they have advertising dollars. They have money to spend.
Yeah. So anyway, then CBS made a big announcement. We're going to be in 26 countries this year. I'm already in 122. What are they? Why are they so slow? Developing this, I don't.
They're slow. They've only got 26. And by the way, that conversation I was having on the other side was with Mr. Odom. So he is ready to go at 1 o'clock. So he's ready to go at 1 o'clock on this particular feed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't even know if they know Mr. Odom over in UK. Are you familiar with Lamar Odom and his story? See, that's what I'm saying.
But you are familiar with the Kardashians.
With our network.
Oh, Lamar. I know. Oh, I didn't know his surname. That's Lamar, is it?
Yes, Lamar that was married to Chloe.
Right.
Okay.
Kardashian. Okay, I guess that's a claim to international fame.
Listen, the Kardashians are huge over here. I'm very proud to say I've never watched an episode. Oh, massive! Yes.
I watched one. I'm going to watch Lamar, but I've only watched one a Kardashian episode. Did you watch a lot of Kardashian, Rick?
No, well, I had to for my job. I had to know what was going on with them, but
Jimmy Kimmel.
Recreationally. But I will tell you, in the vein of reality TV, the Real Housewives of Lagos premiered just a few months ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think I had. It wasn't. Was it? I don't know. It wasn't the Real Housewives of Lagos that I had on my channel, but it was something. It was something very similar. Yeah, that kind of stuff is universal, isn't it? It's everybody seems to love that.
Oh yes. Speaking of which, there's this guy called Chernin or whatever his name is. I lost the article. Anyway, he raised $800 million in the United States recently, and the whole theory is he wanted to do reality TV shows and documentaries, and then that was about it. He said that's where the market's going. At least he got 800 million. Then there was another company called Quibi. I don't know if you followed that one. What did I do with those articles? Anyway, Quibi was by Meg Whitman, who was one of the executives at eBay, and Katzenbach, who was with Geffen, Spielberg, and Katzenbach. They raised, you'll love this one, Lindsay, 1.7 billion. And they started the same month we did. They were out of business in 6 months. We're still around, and we didn't burn through 1.7 billion. But
it's all about the burn. Yeah.
How is it that television executives can be so wrong when it comes to the media? Talk to me about that one. That 1.7 billion Quibi.
I think it's because they don't, people who have been very successful in the past and in a different setup are not necessarily the best people to adapt to changing times, And I mean, I've done it myself. I started when I started Younger TV. I did it probably with the same sort of head on my shoulders that I did CNBC and Bloomberg and Al Jazeera, and I soon learned it was hopeless. Don't think of things like that. As you say, you can't burn through the kind of money that you would take for granted when you're working for a big company, and you have to. The key is, of course, which corners can you cut. You can't cut all the corners because you'll end up with something that isn't worth watching, but you have to learn where you can be smart with money, because if you're not sustainable, that's it. You won't last longer than 6 months.
Right. And also we have one of our commentators that's engrossed in the chess industry. We actually have one chess show that originates from Canada. And also it's broadcast in, let's see, sometimes it's actually broadcast in Russian as well as in English, which brings me to the next step. It's actually a chess show. It looks to me there's new dubbing technology that allows us to speak in English and instantly or will translate into different languages. What are your thoughts about that? Because that's our next acquisition, is actually be able to speak in different languages, even though we're speaking in English. The computer programs will translate and we're speaking in, what do they speak in Congolese or something like that? French. Okay, great. French. That will be able to be translated instantaneously into French. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, I think that in two particular ways, in one way, I think it's incredibly dangerous. And if you're translating news content, you have a huge responsibility. If you're you mentioned the United Nations earlier on, yeah. They have simultaneous translators, and they won't just take any old person off the street who says they can, speak 2 languages. It's such a nuanced thing. You have so much responsibility as you report somebody else's news story that I think that's the first thing that has to be. Now, in a reality show, fine. If you've got, the Kardashians and it's being translated into Bulgarian, fine. I don't think so. There's so much at stake. But then, as a consumer, I've got to say, as I've done international distribution throughout the last 25 years, it's funny. You get certain markets that really like dubbed content and are completely accepting of dubbed content, and you get other markets that really like subtitles. Now, I'm in the subtitle camp because I think that if I'm watching a good drama, I've lost half of the acting if that's taken away, translated, tried to match the mouth movements of the original language, that sort of thing. So I'm very, very, if it's a drama, I won't even watch a drama if it's dubbed. But I think aside from those two things, the news and the drama, I think it can be incredibly helpful, and I think there's going to be a big market for it because it's a shortcut to having to get something professionally translated, which of course, as we know, is very expensive, to get it translated, dubbed, etc. So I think it will have a massive application, but I would warn, I would sort of raise those 2 cautions about it.
Okay. Right. Yeah, Rick.
I just read an article yesterday on that middle-aged people don't like subtitles or closed captioning. Younger people have embraced it because it makes it easier to watch. If as an American trying to watch British TV, I have to crank the volume because the accent gets in the way of me understanding what they're saying. But if it's subtitled, then no problem. And that's going to happen with everything that people are going to, Google Translate is pretty great now. Right. And people are just going to pick whatever technology they can that makes for ease of comprehension.
Yeah, our programs already, you can actually press a button. It'll actually translates all. It already does. Like if I went to my mobile phone to watch this program, the subtitles will come underneath everything that we say. What we don't have yet, which we're working on, is the dubbing into different languages. One of the programs we're looking at right now will put us into 40 different languages so that we can broadcast, they can see the dubbing in their language, and they can also listen to us in their language with a bunch of different people that do the voiceovers. It's kind of to me, a fascinating technology because we can break the English barriers, which right now English is in 62 countries as the predominant language, then maybe another 60 as its second language. But then there's a whole group of people, especially our friends in Latin America, Spanish is their only language. So if you're not speaking Spanish, you're out, you know?
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at right now and that'll probably be first quarter next year or fourth quarter this year that our programs will be in various different languages. You can press a button, which language you want to hear it in. I just think it makes sense for the viewers. And one of our viewers said this, he grew up watching dubbed dramas. I mean, you know, it's just the way it is. And I've watched some content from Netflix that is dubbed, and I say it's pretty good.
If you're in Germany, you'll watch, you know, nothing else. It's all dubbed. You know, there's certain markets in the world where they absolutely prefer it.
Right. Yeah. And I've watched some foreign content that's dubbed, and the dubbing technology is a lot better. I was sitting there going, is that their primary language? It can't be. It's got to be a different language. And the dubbing programs are getting so sophisticated that they just almost match the person's voice, lip movements. I mean, it's absolutely amazing what they're doing right now. And so basically, I just want to do that for the Pod TV network.
I think it will be terrific for what you're doing. The example I was giving was if somebody won an Oscar for his or her acting, I'd like to hear his or her voice rather than a dub. That's all. But, you know, it's very much the minority of programs, you know, that and the concern about news translation. But yeah, for 90% of what goes on, I think it could be tremendously useful and, you know, very inclusive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's the goal, is to be inclusive. When we have a show that broadcasts in Malaysia, which is the World Economic Talent Forum, and he's a Bengali. He goes, you got to broadcast in Bengali. He goes, you wouldn't believe there's hundreds of millions of people. That's all they speak is Bengali. And I'm going, I didn't know that, because in the United States, do we even care what other languages people speak? You know? But he made a very interesting point that if we're not broadcasting in his language, the people just won't turn on and listen to the content. But it's so easy today with technology moving so rapidly that this show could be rebroadcast, redubbed in Bengali, and then sent out to the people in Bangladesh, which I think they also have close to 200 million people over there.
Yes.
You know, that's a big market. Now, when you're in Africa, I hear that the Chinese are there too. Do you ever run into the Chinese media in Africa? Belt Road Initiative. Oh, you hit your
sorry.
microphone again.
Am I?
Now you're good.
Now I'm okay. Yeah, one of the when I was in Lagos, one of the first big independent satellite companies that came in to try and challenge the DSTV, the multi-choice stranglehold that they had on the continent. That was called Star Times, and that was Chinese owned. And yeah, there is a in media as in everywhere else, really, and you know, there's a lot of Chinese money that's been pumped into Africa. There's also quite a lot of concern about that, I think, amongst, you know, various Africans. You know, it's sort of, you know, what exactly are we giving away here? It's fine when the money's being paid and is being repaid, but you know, the idea of a foreign country coming in and foreclosing on your national airport, for instance, is kind of, you know, controversial and rather worrying. So, but yes, I mean, certainly in the media space, there's a lot of investment that's come in, and and I don't know, how do you feel about that from the US?
Well, as I explained to my Chinese friends, we basically ignore them. In other words, as if they don't exist. I'm serious. Over here, I think, again, you could go listen all day to television and all our major networks, and here's what you're going to learn and hear about China. Zero.
Yes.
The Chinese have a whole different attitude. They watch every move we make, everything that we do. And I'm going, and then they reinterpret it as being bad, anti-West, all this other stuff. And they don't get that, no, we don't really care what you guys do over there. Matter of fact, we ignore you completely, like you don't exist. Yeah, Rick.
It also depends on your politics. As a liberal, I learned, accurately or not, that Trump was super isolationist. And while we pulled back from being the rest of the world's friend, China stepped into the vacuum to become the friend of the rest of the world and, eventually drink our milkshake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that might be part of it, but apparently it's still around because I believe if you watched CBS today, an hour of programming, here's what would be about China. Nothing. Okay. And same with NBC, CBS, almost all the major networks. And so China is globally huge and growing, but we're ignoring them like they don't exist. In other words, we just go, okay, so what next? We want to hear about abortion is very important here. Immigration is important, the border, and guns. And that's it. Okay. And all this stuff about China, we really don't care. Yeah, Rick.
You have all this human capital that 100 years ago, you couldn't do anything with all the people in China, all the people in India, all the people in Africa, because there was no means to export their work. But now, you can, China and India combined have 8 times the population of the US. Africa has 1 billion people on top of that.
Right.
And if they can work remotely, they will eat our lunch.
Well, yeah, that's what I think is going to happen. I think that's the trend. And we did only one show called Vivian's China, which was broadcast here in the United States by somebody who was from China, and she was her mother's a medical doctor in China, and she was a student at UCal Berkeley. But getting our products into China where people are going to watch it, it is really very difficult. I don't know if you've had that experience, Lindsay, with China, although we are working with Duke University, who told me, well, Duke is in China. I said, no, I didn't know that. They have a $200 million facility currently in China. So you can get in, but it looks like you got to know the right people. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, you can get in to invest. You can't broadcast. Very difficult to broadcast if you legally in China. I think if you're I mean, interestingly, CCTV, which is the international TV news channel of the Chinese government, recently lost its license over here. As do, I mean, Al Jazeera has always had a license. They're considered, by Ofcom, by our authority, regulatory authority, to be perfectly okay and balanced. But there are certain, I mean, Russia Today lost their license as well, maybe not so surprisingly, but yeah. And so, I mean, I'm sure the Chinese would come back and say, if I said, well, we can't broadcast in your country, they'd probably say, well, we can't broadcast in yours either. So, it's a sort of tit for tat thing. But yes, I mean, it's one thing, I think, investing and bringing in a brand that they find attractive. It's another thing if you're actually bringing in certain programming with debate and controversial topics, etc.
Yeah, Rick.
China is an entrepreneurial dictatorship, which maybe isn't great to live under, but in terms of competing with the rest of the world is huge. China has pushed all the people out of the countryside and into the cities. They have over 200 cities in China now with more than 1 million people, right. And they try to hit a new 1 million person city, I think, every week. Mm-hmm. And and all those people are just making stuff, and also they're doing a lot of capturing of the world's best and brightest that we used to specialize in capturing. If you're smart, come to America and live large. Well, you can live large in Shanghai and Shenzhen or what if you want to make it rain in a strip joint and live in $1 million penthouse, you can do it in China now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and China recently, because I get feeds from China all the time, like every day, that they won the international math contest. And they said the second place team and the third place team were teams that were made up of Chinese Americans and Chinese Indians or stuff like that. So they're really pushing the agenda, which is basically to make China, I guess, the world's reserve currency over the dollar, and also to be the leader of the world. There's only one problem here in the United States. We ignore them completely as if they don't exist. And I just go, how can you ignore 1.3 billion people or 1.5 billion people? I just don't get it. So
the stereotype of a Chinese kid is a kid who's, does 30 hours of homework a week and is really great at stuff. And the stereotype of an American kid is somebody playing video games.
Right. Yeah, I would say that would be pretty true, which is, by the way, is a big industry. And we have one show on that, Gamers Den, which discusses the video game industry, which is larger than the movie industry.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable. So they're pretty large. So I see that to be a pretty interesting industry to go in. Well, we've got to wrap up here because we have Lamar Odom coming on. And so I did want to thank our special guest, Lindsay Oliver, and of course, Rick Rosner, who's with the Mega Society. If you don't know what the Mega Society is, I always tell people, go Google it, and then you'll find out what it is. Because, Rick, I hate to say it, a lot of people don't know what it is.
Well, there's a lot of ridiculousness. You Google me, Google Mega, and you'll, like Keith Raniere, the guy who's now in prison for life for running a sex cult, among other things.
Right.
He's Mega.
Oh, he's Mega? Really? Okay.
I mean, most people in Mega are not they don't run a sex cult. They're mostly normal, nice people, but there's a lot of goofiness too.
There's some interesting people with that. Well, Google the Mega Society and stay tuned for Lamar Odom. He's coming up next on the network, and we'll see you next week on the Media Show. Until then, have a good week and watch Africa. It's coming up. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.